Hey folks, how's it going? Rome Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be covering the Discipline Priest for Cataclysm. Before we get started, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We have a Discord and a Twitch down in the description of the video. If you want to check those out, feel free to. That being said, let's go ahead and jump into the video. Okay, so we don't have a ton of changes coming out of Wrath of the Lich King. We still use Penance, we still use Power Word Shield. That's going to be kind of the core of our gameplay. But we are introduced into something called Atonement, which will be, it'll feel different, right? Because now we're able to heal through our damage. So for the most part, holistically, Disc Priest is pretty similar to Wrath, but Atonement does now come into play. So let's go ahead and read through some of the pros and cons here real quick. So starting out with the pros, we can mitigate incoming damage through talents such as Divine Aegis. So this means whenever we critical strike with a heal, we'll be putting a temporary mini shield on that target for 30% of the critical strike of value. So this is really good. It's also great for tanks, right? It just increases their effective health pull through shields. So this is where a lot of strength of Disc actually does come in, is it just makes everybody in your group, in your party, in your raid, just beefier, just more tanky. We get increased health, we get increased shields, we're able to snipe health pulls. It just really makes the raid in general very tanky. So we also have really good scaling throughout the entire expansion as well. We're going to be a good option. We're never bad at any point in any phase throughout Cata, so that's really good. We have really good raid cooldowns. So we have things like Divine Hymn, which is on a pretty long cooldown, and then Power Word Barrier as well. We already talked about this, but we have great single target tank healing, and then kind of what we already talked about as well is our Atonement. So during downtime of our healing, right, we can kind of go into this sort of DPS phase, DPS the boss, and that DPS is then converted into healing. Some of the cons, anytime you're working with shields in WoW at all, you have to be able to predict the damage before it comes out. There's no point in shielding a target after the damage comes out, because the shield's just going to expire and basically be wasted. So you have to kind of have to be able to juggle when you're using Atonement versus when you're doing straight healing versus when you're shielding. And then, of course, at the very bottom here, AoE healing is not that great, unfortunately, but that's not the purpose of Disc Priest. So if you're worried about AoE healing and you're playing Disc Priest, you're focused on the wrong things. You should be focused on single target tank healing, sniping health pulls, and then Atonement healing for DPS. And then mana management here can be a little bit more difficult than other healing specs in the game. We did have some talents nerfed, which we will talk about in the ability changes section, but just know that with Disc Priest, especially before you start to get gear, you will have to pay more and more attention to this. Then finally down here at the very bottom, we have low AoE healing compared to some of the other healers. So Disc Priest is going to be more focused on mitigation rather than just raw healing. Now, with that being said, we do again have great single target healing and mitigation, but in AoE, we don't have very good mitigation or healing, unfortunately. But to counteract that, we can snipe health pulls with our shields. We got quick, high, bursty single target heals. So it all kind of balances out in the end. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at stats really quick. So in terms of your stat priority, this is kind of what you're looking at here. Intellect and Spell Power is going to be your number one. So there was a change in Cataclysm. Now Spell Power is not its own separate stat, and it is included into Intellect. And Intellect will grant one Spell Power at a 1-to-1 ratio. So that will be our number one priority. It's going to come on pretty much all the gear that you get, so you're not going to have to worry about it too much. After that, we do have a Spirit. So MP5 is completely removed in Cata, and now we only have Spirit that we need to focus on. So this will be your main source of mana regeneration. You want to get as much of this as you possibly can behind Int and Spell Power. So Haste is good if you can get to these specific breakpoints. You can kind of see here in the chart. Based on whatever haste rating you're currently at, you can get an extra tick on some of your healing spells. So this is going to include Renew, Divine Hymn, and then Hymn of Hope. So haste is pretty much only going to be worth it if you can get that extra tick out of your percentage. So if you're ever in an in-between phase, like say you're at 15% haste, you're technically wasting about 2.5%. So you're not getting any value out of that 2.5% of haste. So really what you'd want to do is you'd want to reforge that haste down to 12.51% and roll that into something like Spirit or Critical Strike. So if you are stacking haste, just make sure you are hitting these individual breakpoints. Critical strike is pretty good. It does synergize with that divine aegis that we were kind of talking about earlier. So the more critical strike you have, the more mini shields you're going to be able to proc on your group. Then finally, our mastery rating, shield discipline. It's pretty good. It's not bad. The downside of it is it only affects our shields. It doesn't affect any of our healing. So that's kind of why it falls on the bottom of this tier list here. Okay, so we do have some ability changes here. Going to read through them real quickly. Borrowed time, the amount of talent points required to fully obtain this talent has been reduced to 2. Then also, I didn't include it here, but the haste granted has been reduced to 14% at 2 of 2 talents. Then for Rapture here, this now has a 12-second internal cooldown on it before we get mana back from its proc. Twin Disciplines here previously buffed your instant cast spells only, now provides increased spell damage to Shadow and Holy spells. We have Renewed Hope, extends the critical effect chance to Grace, and no longer provides damage reduction to all party and raid members when using Power Word Shield. Soul Wording here no longer reduces the mana cost of Power Word Shield, so this did get nerfed a little bit. Enlightenment here, this is just basically granting us more intellect. We get 15% more intellect just for being disciplined. So this now grants intellect instead of spirit and spell haste. Then we also have Absolution here that is also baseline with disc. And we can actually remove 2 magic effects with 1 dispel magic now. So that's really nice. Then finally with Pain Suppression here, this now only gives threat and damage reduction and no longer grants a resistance to dispel mechanics. Okay, so healing single targets, kind of like we were saying earlier, is going to be the bread and butter to our healing. Now, obviously, as a healer, we don't have any sort of set rotation. We typically follow more of a priority list. So even though this is labeled as single target rotation, think of it more as a general priority list instead. So your role most likely is going to be healing the tanks and sniping health pools to keep people from dying through your big instant cast absorbs. So this is where your shields kind of come in. They're great for this. So typically pre-pull, step 1 here, we want to make sure that we have Power Word Shield and Prayer of Mending up. It is also okay to pop Pain Suppression on pull if you see fit. And then we can use Penance here to proc our Grace, Divine Aegis, and Inspiration. So if you are not sure what those are, they're kind of down here at the bottom. So Grace here, your Flash Heal, Greater Heal, Heal, and Penance spells bless the target with Grace, increasing all healing received from the priest by 8%. This effect will stack up to 3 times. So that's our Grace. We have Inspiration here. Reduces the target's physical damage taken by 10% for 15 seconds after getting a critical effect from your Flash Heal, Heal, Greater Heal, Binding Heal, Penance. All that stuff. I'm not going to read it all. Divine Aegis, critical heals and all heals from Prayer of Healing create a protective shield on the target, absorbing 30% of the amount healed, last 15 seconds. So this is one of the reasons that Penance can be very strong, is because it can proc all 3 of these. Now, sure, Penance procs all 3 of these, but the main thing you're looking to proc with Penance is your Inspiration, right? Because Inspiration procs just from a critical effect of a heal. So, your Penance is shooting multiple little missiles out, and each of those have a chance to proc. So this has a much higher chance to proc with Penance than something such as like a Flash Heal. So we want to Penance on the tank as much as we possibly can. Keep the buffs up on the tank. We also want to cast PI as needed. Then once we get all of our buffs up here, right, then we can kind of go into Atonement. And if you're not sure what Atonement is, it's down here in the bottom right. So when you heal or you deal damage with Smite or Holy Fire, you instantly heal a nearby low health friendly target within 15 yards from the enemy target, equal to 50% of the damage dealt. So this is really nice because this is nothing like retail. Retail, it's like a buff that you have to maintain. In Cata, it just happens. So it's just kind of like a passive effect. And you just want to make sure that you are weaving in some Holy Fires and some Smites to get that sort of ticking damage going. You pretty much always want to have Holy Fire up on the boss as well, right? That leaves a dot effect, and that dot effect is going to heal through Atonement. Then from there, you can kind of spam Smite, any sort of low healing phase. Then we will be using Archangel at 5 stacks of Evangelism. So this is going to be something else that you have to track is Evangelism here. So Evangelism at 5 stacks is going to do 2 things. It's going to give us mana back, and it's also going to increase our healing. So we only want to be using Archangel. We want to be using it on cooldown, right? But we only want to be using it at 5 stacks. So from here, keep casting Holy Fire, right? You want to keep that dot ticking. Recast Power Word Shield, Prayer Mending, and Penance on the tank. And then we want to be using Inner Focus and Shadow Fiend, typically on cooldown, just to help support our mana. So when things get crazy and it's a very heal intensive, you can use something like Prayer of Healing here, and this is going to heal your target's group. So this pairs pretty nicely with something like Divine Aegis. You know, that's going to give us that sort of mini shield. And the cool thing about Divine Aegis and Prayer of Healing is it doesn't have to critical strike. It just has to hit that group's target, and it's always going to proc Divine Aegis. So there's no critical strike involved when you're using Prayer of Healing. Now we do have those strong cooldowns here, Divine Hymn and Power Word Barrier. These are going to be your strong raid cooldowns. Divine Hymn's on an 8-minute cooldown, Power Word Barrier on a 3-minute. This is going to be a barrier that you put on the ground. Your allies could run into it. They basically take less damage. So Divine Hymn is an 8-second channel cast, so you got to be kind of careful with it, but it does pump out a lot of AoE healing to your group, or to your entire raid actually. So these are going to be your two main focuses, right, on high AoE phases, but we also have a couple other little things here that we can kind of weave in. So obviously Power Word Shield, you can be sniping those health pools. When people get low, throw a Power Word Shield just to keep them alive. This is very mana intensive, so you need to be careful with it. We obviously still have pain suppression on the tank. And in any sort of situation where the tank is taking very high single target damage, and you might see this in conjunction with an AoE damage phase, so it just kind of depends. You got to pick your priorities, but you can always pair Penance with a greater heal, and then you can use Inner Focus to make that mana efficient. So I know this little section here is under the AoE rotation. I probably should have labeled this as high damage phase, because this is what you're going to be focused on when there's a lot of damage going out. This top portion here being AoE, this sort of bottom section here being single target, and this very bottom section is just, you know, the Archangel with Evangelism. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring those stacks. All right, then for talents, not much changes here. It's pretty universal with most specs. Your talents are kind of set in stone. The darkness talent, though, in the shadow tree can be a little bit flexible with something like Veiled Shadows. If you want to try to get a little bit more mana support, or you can, you know, use it on something like Desperate Prayer, which is in the Holy Tree. Then also we have Soul Wording, which is flexible, as you know, spamming shields can, you know, cause some mana issues. So you may want to use something like Train for Thought for more penance casts. It's kind of up to you, but these are going to be the general talents that we are running here. Okay, then these are going to be the glyphs that we have here. So we have Glyph of Penance first, so this reduces the cooldown of Penance by 2 seconds. Then we have Glyph of Power Word Shield, so the shield will also heal your target for 20% of the absorption amount. Then finally over here on the left, we have Glyph of Prayer of Healing. So Prayer of Healing will leave a hot on all the targets that are healed. So this will really help with those AoE phases, because not only are we getting a shield, we're also getting a hot out of this as well. So we're getting a shield, a hot, and the direct heal. So really nice glyph here. Then for major glyphs, we're running Glyph of Divine Accuracy. So it increases your hit rating for your Smite and Holy Fire by 18%. So this is going to put you within the hit cap for these spells. And that's going to synergize really well, obviously, with our Atonement. Glyph of Smite, which will just simply buff our damage to targets afflicted by Holy Fire. Then Glyph of Prayer of Mending, which is going to just basically buff the first initial charge of Prayer of Mending by 60%. Glyph of Shadow Fiend, that's going to give us a little bit of mana back in case our pet does die. We have Glyph of Fortitude here, which is going to reduce the mana cost of the spell by 50%. That's super nice to have. And then Glyph of Levitate, that's just going to mean we don't have to take that light feather to use our levitate ability. Okay, then here's the list of gems and enchants we'll be using. One thing to note, be sure that you do meet your meta socket gem requirements. So make sure you're getting 3 gems of the correct color. We're going to be running the red intellect gems. They're going to be the most sought after for us. Then on the enchants list here, you'll notice that we have a lot of items that are for a specific profession. So if you are not that profession, then just go ahead and skip to the next item in the list. All right, then finally for consumables, you'll be running the Flask of Draconic Mind here. That's going to give us 300 intellect for an hour. Then for your potions here, you can run a mythical mana potion, Potion of Consecration, and a volcanic potion. So volcanic potion is going to give us that 1200 intellect for 25 seconds. It's on a 60-second cooldown, super OP. And then Potion of Concentration here, it's going to give us 22,000 mana regen, but we're basically asleep and defenseless when we're using it. Then for our mana potion, we can pick up a mythical mana potion. Then for our food buff, we're probably going to be running fortune cookies or sagefish heads. That's of course if the feast is not available for whatever reason. We're looking really for the 90 intellect and 90 stamina buff, and those are both provided with these two, so whichever one's cheaper, just pick that one up. Then for healing, we can pick up, of course, a mythical healing potion and a dense ember silk bandage. And then just kind of optional down here at the bottom, you can pick up the drums of speed and the Big Daddy if you are engineering. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.